ever felt frustrated and helpless after listening and doing everything your vet told you to do, but it only made your sick pet worse and not get any better? That's me in 2008 with my first adopted cat, Meow. I did everything the vet told me to do, and I realized she wasn't getting any better and only worse. So I decided to look into alternative health options and was drawn to the stories of holistic pet service entrepreneurs and their transformative journey, overcoming obstacles, chasing their passion, and creating a movement that has caused a ripple effect of positive change in the lives of their clients and pets around the world. Join me as I share the raw, inspiring journeys of these amazing entrepreneurs, their successes and failures. My name is Emrys Wang, and this is The Raw Entrepreneur. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world right now. This is Emrys Wang of The Raw Entrepreneur. Today's episode is with the queen of big cats, Carole Baskin of Big Cat Rescue. If she had a tagline for her life, it would be, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." Carole Baskin grew up in humble beginnings, ran away from home at age 16, endured physical, emotional, and mentally abusive relationships, faced multiple financial, legal, and life-threatening situations over the course of her 60 years on this planet, and yet never lost sight of her life's mission of saving both big and small cats around the world. My interview with her wasn't very long, but I was deeply moved by how humble, honest, and open she was about her life, and her sincere passion to help both big and small cats took her on a roller coaster ride that's not for the faint-hearted, but made her the woman that she is today. She is a living example of when you're authentic and real, the truth will set you free. This is her story. Who is Carole Baskin, please?
Well, Carole Baskin is somebody who really loves domestic cats. And my whole childhood, I thought what I was going to do was end the killing of healthy cats and kittens in shelters by aggressive spay and neuter programs. And I really felt like that was something that could be accomplished. There were, at that time, when I was a child back in the 60s, there were literally millions of cats dying every year in shelters due to overpopulation. And I had experience with that myself with a domestic cat that I owned, and she had kittens, and my grandmother made me take her to the shelter, and she said that she and her babies were all going to go to this wonderful new home. And I didn't know about shelters, but when I learned about shelters, I thought back to Smokey and her kittens, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to fix that. I've got to make that right. And so that had been my passion. I left home at the age of 15, and even when I was at home, I was often working all kinds of jobs. I was selling Amway door to door. I would go around and round up all of the kids in the neighborhood and get them to help me go mow lawns or wash cars. Or when I lived in a trailer park, we'd actually wash the trailers. And I did all of that because I felt like I needed a lot of money to fix this problem of this overpopulation with domestic cats and kittens. And so I was constantly trying to build up that business, and then left home at the age of 15. I was working sometimes 3 jobs because at home, my father wouldn't let me quit school and go to work full time. He was like, you need an education. And I felt like, well, I have this important work I got to get done. And so I worked like crazy. And I thought that the way that I would be able to fix this problem would be probably by becoming a veterinarian or working in a veterinary hospital. And so I spent a lot of time in vet clinics. And what would happen is if a bobcat, which is a native cat here in Florida and in the US, because this was both in Florida and in West Virginia that I was living during that period of time, if a bobcat gets hit by a car or shot by a hunter, the vets can fix them up in 30 minutes to an hour. But then you've got months of that cat having to heal broken bones or wounds before they can go back to the wild. And so because I was so well known as, the person who loves cats, the vets would ask me if I would take the cats home for rehab and release. And so from the time I was 17 years old, I was rehabbing and releasing cats who were born in the wild. It's not legal to rehab and release cats who are born in captivity, big cats anyway. So these were all cats who had started out in the wild that I was able to release. And then and I continued to, work really hard, and I got into real estate, and I built up well, it was a multi-million dollar real estate business. And I finally felt by the time that I was in my 30s that I had reached a level of success and I'd say financial freedom, because with real estate, you have, in my case anyway, I had mortgages and rental properties. So I had this passive income that was coming in that didn't require my everyday attention to things. I could hire somebody to just manage the books, and the money would keep flowing in. So I felt like it was finally my time to be able to do the work that I really wanted to do. And my husband and I were buying llamas because we had a lot of properties, and we would turn the llamas loose on these big tracts of land because they clear about eye level, and then you could move them to the next big property. And the guy next to me at this exotic animal auction where we were buying llamas starts bidding on a bobcat. And I leaned over to him and I said, when that cat grows up, she is going to tear your face off, because bobcats are mean. And they are the most ungrateful animal you will ever work with in the wild. No matter how much you are trying to help them out, they just would rather kill you than look at you. And so this cat was only 6 months old, and she had been a pet, and she'd been born in captivity, so she couldn't be set free. And the guy said, I'm a taxidermist. I'm just going to club her in the head in the parking lot and make a den decoration out of her. And so I started crying, and my husband started bidding, and we probably paid more for that bobcat than anybody's ever paid for a bobcat, but she was not going to get killed in the parking lot that day. And so we brought her home, and she was, as I would have expected, just a wretched pet. I mean, she was nice to me, but she chased my daughter. She would lay up on top of the refrigerator, and when my husband would come in the room, she'd launch down on top of him and start pulling his hair out. We had a German Shepherd that was just terrified of this 20-pound cat. And so instead of thinking, wow, this is a really bad pet, my husband started calling around to see if he could find somebody that she could be raised with, that she would get along with and wouldn't kill. And a guy up in Minnesota said that we could come to his place, but he said he wouldn't ship any animals. We'd have to drive up there. So we did. And we drove up. My daughter was 12 years old at the time. We had a little friend of hers from school with us, and we were driving in a van. And when we pulled up to this place, it was in La Center, Minnesota, and it was just this big metal barn. And when the guy invites us inside, and when we go inside, the flies in there were so thick, we had to put handkerchiefs over our faces just to be able to breathe without getting them up our nose and in our mouths. And my eyes are adjusting to this dark room, and there's like row after row after row of these, like almost like rabbit hutches, where it's like a wire floor, maybe like you would see in a puppy mill. I don't know if they have similar things like this in Singapore, where they raise animals up off the ground so that the urine goes through.
Yeah.
But all of the feces and the fur and the bones from the prey animals that they ate, all of that stuff was in the cages. And it was just absolutely disgusting. And the guy's pulling out these kittens, these bobcats and lynx, Canada lynx and Siberian lynx. And I'm looking around the room, and over in the corner, there is a pile of dead bobcats. And they've cut this little piece of white belly fur off of them and just thrown these cats onto a pile. And I'm trying to process all of this. And I asked the guy if there was this big of a market for these cats as pets. And he said, oh no, we're a fur farm. We'll just sell whatever we can as pets. And then next year we'll slaughter the rest of them for their fur. And I just burst into tears at this point, because now it's starting to all make sense. And my husband said, how much for every cat here? And we came home with 56 bobcats and lynx that day. And so that's how the sanctuary started. So now we have 56 from the fur farm and Windsong. So we've got 57 big cats, or exotic cats. And in both cases, I thought, I can fix this. I can, I'll get these animals out of here. I'll get them into some decent homes, and this will be done. So we started putting the cats out into pet homes, and that worked for about a year, year and a half. And then they become bobcats and Siberian lynx and Canadian lynx. They grow up to be who they were designed to be in the first place. And what I discovered is people were not willing to dedicate their entire lives to taking care of that animal. And those animals needed huge outdoor enclosures. They needed specialized, raw meat diets. They needed specialized veterinary care that people couldn't afford or couldn't find. And so they started bringing the cats back. And so, meanwhile, people had started calling me and saying, I hear you got all these cats. I got this tiger. I don't want it anymore. Can you take my tiger? And I'm like, what? What are these people doing with lions and tigers and cougars and leopards as pets? That was crazy to me. I had no idea that existed. So meanwhile, we've gone and we bought 28 cats off, another 28 cats off the fur farm, another 22 off another fur farm, and we had started rescuing cats off of fur farms in Canada because we had gotten all of the cats out of the fur farms in the US. And then people started bringing their lions and tigers and cougars. And before we knew it, we had 200 cats. And so by this time, we are like really inundated in cats. And that was when I lost my husband in 1997. And so we were right in the middle of doing those Canadian fur farm rescues. And I was never able to finish that work because of all of the chaos that happened as a result of losing my husband. And unfortunately, the Canadian fur farm industry continued up until just about 2018, when all of the designers pretty much have now banned fur in their products. And there's so many places that are banning fur, and it's become a very barbaric idea to people to wear cat fur. So thankfully, that whole industry is finally closed down. But I feel like I lost a lot of time there because of losing my husband and not being able to. Because what happened after that was, um, because nobody knew where he was, we had to have a conservatorship to manage the estates so that none of the properties or anything that I had could be used to take care of the cats, with the exception of $150,000 a year, like allowance. And at that time, it was costing us $350,000 a year to take care of the cats. So that's when I had to start asking people to help and asking for donations and becoming a nonprofit. We had actually done that in 1995. So 2 years earlier, we'd gotten our 501c3. But, and the only reason we had done it then was because people would ask if they could help out or sponsor a cat or do things like that. So we wanted to be sure we were in compliance with the law. But our real estate business was back then enough to take care of the sanctuary until I wasn't allowed to use my own assets. And then that went on for 5 years. And finally, that was over in 2001 or 2002. And then it was 2003 before the sanctuary ever broke even for the first time. So it raised enough money on its own to cover all of its expenses. And I didn't have to pay for the shortfall from my real estate business. So that has been good. And then I met my current husband, Howard Baskin. I met him in November 2002. And then he came to work with me in 2003. So he's a Harvard MBA, really smart guy. And he started working on all of the things that we could do to generate more money for the sanctuary, like doing specialized feeding tours and keeper tours. And we started doing a big gala called the Fur Ball and all of those kinds of things to get us onto sound financial footing that didn't require my real estate business. And during this period of time, I've been able to rebuild the real estate business back to what it was before. But I've done that during a period of time where every year I have to raise between $3 and $4 million to take care of the cats. So I've got to do all of that on the nonprofit side, plus trying to run this for-profit real estate business. So it's been a really busy time.
Oh my goodness. Um, wow. You know, you tell this story with such ease, and it, if people didn't listen carefully, or if they didn't know you enough, they would be they would be so surprised at how much challenges you actually faced. I mean, you painted with a really broad really beautiful brush here, because now, you're in this place in time now. But during the last, wow, more than 20 years, yeah, it hasn't been easy, and
It was never easy. It's been
yeah,
really hard during some of those periods.
I mean, like, how did you ever think of giving up the sanctuary? Did you ever think about quitting?
I've never thought about quitting, but I did reach a point where I thought I had reached the bottom of the barrel. And that was in that was 9/11 of 2001. So if you recall 9/11 hitting America, what happened here as a result was that all tourism stopped, and we were really reliant on people coming here and visiting the cats and that tour revenue. And all donations to charities other than those that were involved in helping the victims from 9/11 pretty much stopped. And so animal charities, I mean, like animal charities represent, at least here in the US, 3% of the charities out there, but we're competing for 1% of the dollars given to charity. And so that was a period of time where there was no money coming in. And so 2001 was right at the end of the conservatorship. The conservatorship, our assets prior to that had been somewhere around $5 or $6 million. By the end of that 5 or 6 years, or that end of that, what was it, 5 years that we went through the conservatorship from 97 to 2001, because of all of the, I don't even know how to say this, all of the people who were involved in that conservatorship all had attorneys, and all of the attorneys had to be paid from the assets of the conservatorship. So essentially, I was paying all of these people to sue me for 5 years to try and take as much of my property as they could possibly take during that period of time. And I had no way to stop it. If you look at the things that are going on with Britney Spears right now and the conservatorship that she's having to deal with, I look at her and I think, oh my God, I know what you're talking about, girlfriend, because it's such an unfair system that once you're in it, you cannot get out of it, because none of the attorneys involved want you to get out of it because they're making so much money off of it. So it was a horrible, horrible period that just completely devastated the real estate business. And at the end of that, I had just my personal possessions, some, I don't wear a lot of jewelry, but I wear a lot of cheap jewelry, but I don't wear a lot of expensive jewelry, but I had a few pieces that my husband had given me over the years. And when 9/11 hit and all of the income stopped, I actually got down to my last $20,000. And $20,000, when you've got 200 big cats out there that have to be fed, that only takes you a couple of weeks. And then you're done. And I had reached this point where it was like, there's nowhere for these animals to go, because all of the sanctuaries were in that kind of trouble. All of the zoos were in that kind of trouble. There was no place for these animals, no way to feed them. I had a great car. I loved this car. It was a kit car, but it was a 1937 Mercedes Gazelle. And this guy had been bugging me to death to buy that car. And finally, I had to sell it because I had to feed the cats. I had to sell my jewelry. I sold off all of the household items I could sell. And with that last $20,000, I did something I had never done before. And I actually hired a consulting firm, which I would have, I would have thought that was the dumbest thing in the world to do at the time. But what they did was they came in and they did what they call a SWOT analysis. It's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I knew what my threats were, and I knew what my weaknesses were. I was running out of money. I had a whole lot of big cats to feed. But the strengths and opportunities were what I decided to focus my attention on. And up until that point, I had been focusing on, here's all this bad stuff coming at me and I don't know what to do. And so I just turned it completely around and said, I'm not looking at any of that behind me. I'm going to look at what are the opportunities and what are my strengths. And the opportunities were that back then people would refer to, we were called Wildlife on Easy Street back then. And everybody said we were Tampa Bay's best kept secret. Nobody had ever heard of us. And I thought, you know what? that's an opportunity, because if people hear about us and know about us, they'll support us. And the other big strength that we had is that cats are gorgeous. They're magnificent. They are charismatic. And so what I started doing was going out to all of the like Chamber of Commerce for Tampa and St. Petersburg and Oldsmar and all the cities around us. I would go to their meetings and I would do these big slide presentations of all these beautiful cats and these slides and these videos and let them see who these magnificent animals were and pitch the fact that we needed their support. And it turned it around. I really believe in the secret. I believe that what you think about, you bring about. And this was like my first real experience of doing that, of taking something that was so bad and completely turning it around just by focusing on what I wanted the world to look like. And it happened. And so I would encourage anybody who is facing hard times to not look at what is coming at you. Look at where you want to be and actually see yourself there and take every step every day toward that. And ultimately, you will bring that into your reality.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. You know, may I ask, because, you know, from my limited knowledge of you, um, you started really with nothing um, when you were young. You know, you started with nothing. And did you, I mean, did you ever imagine that you would be where you are today?
Yeah, I always believed that I would be able to fix this problem of domestic cats and kittens dying in shelters. And I believed that that was going to be a hugely expensive endeavor. And I believed that I could make that happen. I've never cared about things like for my own benefit. I'm driving a 10-year-old truck right now that the reason I have to leave at the top of the hour is because I have to take it in for service to keep the thing running. Um, I live in a house that I paid, I think, $35,000 for, and I've never done any work to that house. It still looks pretty much like the day I bought it. And it could really use a lot of work. I haven't put any time or energy into it because I felt like this big cat thing was something that I needed to fix so that I could get back to the little cat thing. So I've always imagined being able to accomplish something big and something that's going to be expensive, but I didn't see myself, certainly never saw myself in this kind of a reality where it's like people all over the world thinking that I'm a gold digging, home wrecking murderer. I never saw that coming. But I think that that will subside once people actually get to know me and get to know more of the truth about what they had been misled to believe in Tiger King.
Wow. Personally, I've not watched Tiger King. And after I've heard, what Tiger King has done to you, personally, I'm not very keen on watching it anytime soon, to be honest. Um, you know, to me, I think what you've accomplished with Big Cat Rescue, if people just looked at the condition of the cats, and you have so much footage, like live cameras, showing people around the world, how the cats are doing, and I mean, like, wow, how big is Big Cat, the sanctuary itself?
Big Cat Rescue is on 67 acres, and we currently have right around 50 cats. We had 200 cats at our peak. Um, but I really do think what you said is so important and that is that you be transparent. And we have done that through 24-hour live webcams all over the property, although after Hurricane Elsa, most of our cameras were down for a while, but because of the flooding and stuff out here and cameras getting hit by lightning, and every time we have a bad storm, we lose cameras. We've got a bunch of them on order right now. But what I wanted to do during that period of time when we were having all of that flooding that was happening is I went out there and I filmed it. And I said, this is happening right now. These cages are full of water. The cats are all in the highest spots they can get to in their cages because of all this flooding. And I wanted people to be able to see that this is the reality of running a sanctuary. It's not always the fun stuff that we get to put out there on YouTube of cats playing and running around and rolling in the sun and the breeze and chasing butterflies and tearing up enrichment and all of that kind of stuff. That there's some hard things that come along with running a sanctuary and some scary things. And as a result, I think people really appreciate the fact that they can see with their own eyes what's going on here anytime they want. We have live webcams in our hospitals so that when we're doing surgery or any kind of operations on the cats or just giving vaccines or any of that, people can tune in and see that live as well. I don't know any place else that allows cameras into their hospitals.
Yeah, no, that was the one thing that really um caught my eye on Big Cat was the fact that you had all these cameras, and to me that's really 100% transparency, because shit happens and you're not going to hide it, and people can see for themselves where the donations are going to as well, you know but it's like wow. I mean, like, how how many staff do you have running the sanctuary right now, paid staff?
We have 10 paid staff. We had 20 before COVID. And the only way that we were going to make it through COVID because of the lack of tour revenue, like I said, I have to raise between 3.5 and $4 million a year. And our tour revenue was a huge part of that. It was about a third of our income. And so I knew we weren't going to be able to do tours because you can't have people coming in groups of 20 and walking around in a close group together if they can't breathe on each other. And we didn't want them breathing on the cats after we learned that cats can contract COVID. So we had to close our doors on March the 15th of 2020. We let go probably, I'd say, about a quarter of our staff in the first couple of months. And then we realized that COVID was getting worse, not better, and had to let the rest of them go by about June. And the paid staff here do administrative work. So the people that I had to let go were people who did things like our director of donor appreciation. One of the things we feel like is really important is if somebody's donating to you, they need to feel like that they've made a difference and that you appreciate it. And so we're really big on thanking people right away, getting a note out in the mail to them, thanking them in videos. And so I had to let that person go. Now I'm the person who does that on top of everything else that I do. We had a PR director who would get all of the news stories about us. So she would, every time we would give out watermelons to the cats, she'd contact the news stations and say, hey, you want to come over and see the cats getting watermelons? Or hey, do you want to come over and see the cat? Guess who's going to win the Super Bowl? Or she'd get the press out here. So now she's gone. So that has fallen to me as well. We had a person who would go around to all of the schools and do educational programs for them and did a lot of field trips out here at the sanctuary. And so we had to let her go, and we've got a volunteer doing her job. We were doing a lot of foster cat and kitten, what do you call it? Fostering for the Humane Society of Tampa Bay. So because we had so many interns who live on the property 24/7, they could send over a litter of orphaned kittens, and our people will get up every 4 hours around the clock and feed kittens because they love cats. And so they would send us all the really hard cases like that, the ones that had to be bottle fed every 4 hours, or the feral cats that nobody could get their hands on. And they would spend the nights with the interns, and then they'd come over into what we call the kitten cabana, which also has a live webcam. And that way the cats would all be socialized, and they were really easy to adopt out. So they would go back to the Humane Society to be adopted out. But we lost a lot of our interns during the COVID because they couldn't travel, and they come from all around the world. And so we had to stop our fostering program. Well, that meant our kitten manager no longer had a job because her whole job was managing, bringing in kittens, taking them back, doing all the health stuff and everything. So we lost Karma. She's still a volunteer. Most of these people that we had to let go are still volunteers. They just don't get paid anymore. But all of those jobs that we had to let go were administrative. All of our animal care has always been done by volunteers, and even our vets volunteer their time. So none of the cat care has suffered as a result of COVID because people are still, in fact, during COVID, a lot of people didn't have jobs. So we had more volunteers than ever who could spend more time doing things like reading to the cats and making enrichment for them and spending time with them and making sure that they're taken care of. So at least that's the good, if there was any good that came out of COVID, it was the fact that it didn't impact the lives of our cats.
Wow. Um, your sanctuary was called what, Wildlife Easy Street or something.
Wildlife on Easy Street.
Yeah. Um, how has it? How would you say the sanctuary has evolved since then to where it is now? Because from the cameras, the way you design the property, the sanctuary for the cats, you have the roaming. They actually literally do migration around the property, which honestly I think is so cool. I've never seen it done before, and I'm just really curious to know, was it always this concept, or did the concept change over time? What was it like before and now in terms of evolution?
Um, as you pointed out, we used to be called Wildlife on Easy Street, and that's because we're on a little dirt road called Easy Street, and we had a lot of different kinds of wildlife back then. We had otters and uh, llamas and Patagonian cavies and everything else, but I feel like you can only really know one thing really well. So like I know real estate really well, and that's the only thing I focus on in my for-profit business. And with the cats, I feel like I know cats really well, but I don't know what the nutritional needs are of a Patagonian cavie, and I don't want to know. I want to focus on cats. So as all of those animals that my husband had brought in died out, we just didn't replace them with anything but cats. We only rescued cats going forward. And then in 2003, we were meeting with a firm about doing our big gala, the first gala we wanted to do. And they said, Wildlife on Easy Street, that's really an unfortunate name. And I said, well, why do you think that's a bad name? And they said, well, you're trying to raise money and yet you're on Easy Street. It doesn't sound like you need it. And so they came up with the idea of Big Cat Rescue. So that's how the name changed. But as far as where the cats were, when my husband was around and we did those huge fur farm rescues where we're coming in with 56 cats and then 28 cats and then 22 cats, the cages that we built back then were tiny compared to what we have now. These were, I mean, they were many times bigger than what the state standard was, but they were these long, like dog kennel type runs. So they'd be like 8 feet wide and 48 feet long, and it might be divided in half and have 2 or 3 bobcats on each side, and they had concrete floors, so you just sprayed off the concrete, which is the way a lot of these cats are kept because it's a lot easier to keep them that way. But in 1996, my father had a furniture business, and he sold the business, and he was driving my mother nuts. She still worked at another job, and he was calling her like every 5 minutes. I don't know how to make popcorn. I don't know how to make coffee. I don't know how to do this. And she said, you got to find something for your dad to do. So I brought him out to the sanctuary and I said, I'd really love to have like a pond and a little waterfall for the cats to play in. And so I set him loose doing that. The next day he comes in and he says, I finished that. What do you want me to do? And I said, well, how about another pond? By the time we got to the third pond, I was like, why don't you just surprise me? And he said, I hate these concrete cages. I think these cats should be down, living on the dirt and having trees and bushes and plants and flowers. And I was like, knock yourself out. Whatever you want to do, I'm all about it. And so from 96 forward, my father built all of these cages. And he came up with a really unique design, as you might know from looking at our site. They're not boxes like you usually see. And the thing about cats is that they pace, and they'll pace along wherever as far as they can get out into the cage. And it's just neurotic looking to me. And so he built these winding walls that were curving. And at least when the cat's kind of strolling along the edge of that, it doesn't look as neurotic, even though it is. I mean, it's coping behavior because these animals should be in hundreds of square miles, not in cages to begin with. But it was just so much easier on everybody not to see these cats being stressed. And if they're not stressed, then we're not stressed. And I think that kind of is a virtuous loop. And part of him building that type of cage was that you could only go 20 feet wide. So these things are built like these big snakes all over the place. And we've joined a whole bunch of them together because we used to have 200 cats. Now we have 50 cats. So we still have the same number of cages, but they're hooked together with these little tunnels that is probably what you're talking about. And then we built these big play yards. One was for our lions and tigers, and it was 2.5 acres, and it is a box. And then the other one is 22,000 square feet, and it has a roof on it because where we live, a lot of the cats, all the little cats, have to have roofs on their cages. So the way we get them to and from their vacation areas are through more tunnels. And so we'd have like a big box here, and then we'll have this tunnel that goes out to this cage, and this tunnel that comes out to this cage, and the tunnel comes out. And so the cats will travel back and forth to their vacation site through those tunnels. If I had known back when we were starting the sanctuary, when we first started building it, I would have just said, build tunnels everywhere, because the cats have more fun in those freaking tunnels than they do when they're on vacation. They would rather run back up and down those tunnels all day long than actually go to or from their cages when it's time. And you probably see that because we do it live, and we're just like, oh, no, don't turn around, come back this way. The cats will they do what they want to do, and we just devote the whole day to letting them do it.
Oh, I love it. Yes, you're right. I love seeing the cats. The video feed, honestly, if I have a crappy day and I just go to your video feed, it makes me happy. Hands down. Really. It just, yeah, definitely. That's why I've always wondered who came up with the idea of this design, because I thought it was very clever, and now you tell me it's your dad.
Yeah.
Wow. I like, unbelievable. He's a very smart man, isn't he?
Yeah. He was one of those he had all kinds of jobs. Like he was a pilot for the governor of West Virginia, and he was a private detective when I was a kid. And he had a lawn care business when I was a kid. And then he had a furniture store. And when he first came out to build cages, I thought he's got like no engineering training. And yet these cages are amazing for our weather because we have hurricanes here. And in hurricanes, what you have is a lot of wind and a lot of rain. And the wind, if it catches on any kind of a hard surface, it'll blow it over, blow it down. But by having this curved thing around all of the trees are actually hooked into the ceiling. And so what we found is after a hurricane, even though our neighbors like lose all of their trees, we don't lose our trees because our cages are kind of anchoring the trees to the ground, and the trees are anchoring the cages to the ground. So it's this symbiotic relationship that nobody planned, but he had that vision for it that turned out to be just amazing.
Yeah, no, honestly, it's so clever. It's so, like, given the fact that, it's a sanctuary for rescued cats, and they can't be released in the wild, hence that's why they're in a sanctuary like yours. But the fact that how Big Cat Rescue has been designed, and built, is so genius. It's just so clever, you know. And we have your father to thank that. It's just so amazing. It's really clever, and it's so. What I love is it really is very intentional. I don't know whether he meant it at that time when he was building it in his brain, whether he knew what he was doing intuitively, or by, like, or instinctively. But when I see, every time when I look at your property, and especially the aerial view, I just think it's so beautiful. It's so clever and so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
It is.
You
It
know,
is.
some of the things that he did in the cage design, he did because of the fact that he saw what we were doing before. And before, if we had to vaccinate, and we have to vaccinate the cats every 3 years for all of the same things that domestic cats are vaccinated for. which means every 3 years, it was usually me and my husband and maybe my father or my daughter would, cover ourselves in as much padding as we possibly could, and then have to go into the cages with these big nets, trap the cat on the ground, and then give it a vaccine. And my father would look at this and he's like, there's got to be a better way. We're going to get killed doing this. And so those little feeding boxes that the cats go into, he was the one that came up with that idea. He's like, if the cats go in there every day and that's where they get food and that's where they get water, you can just shut the door. Now you've got them in a little box. And then we created something he called the catacomb. And it was like this comb that would go down through the top of the cage, and you could just swing it to one side or the other to push the cat up against the wall so you can give them the vaccine and it's over. And so things like that went into that evolution of design.
Oh, he's a brilliant man. Is he still around?
No, I lost him a few years ago.
Well, you know, I'm sorry, for, but you've got a wonderful dad to be so supportive. Was he always supportive of your dreams of doing this sanctuary?
I think I got my shyness from my father. He was a person who would almost never speak to anyone. And I was like that. I mean, I would just break down in tears if I had to speak to anyone. So when you, Amaris, said that you were shy, I thought, oh, she doesn't know the beginning of shy. I hated to have to speak up and talk to people. And my father was the same way. So my entire childhood growing up with him, I can only remember a couple of times where we actually had a discussion. And it was things like he saw some drawing that I did because I was a budding artist at the time. And he was like, who did that? And I said, I did. And he was like, you couldn't have done that. And I was like, yeah, I did that. And it was like, to finally be recognized by my father for this artwork was so huge for me. But that was like the extent of the entire conversation right there. And then, when he would go out on stakeouts, I would sit there in the car with him and we would watch people for hours waiting for them to come out of a building or do something because they didn't believe in paying other people to take care of your kids. You took care of your own kids. And so you took them on stakeout or you took them to your work with you. And we would sit there for hours, not saying a word, just feeling really comfortable with each other, but just not talking because neither one of us did. So it was amazing to be able to work with him all these years here. And my mother came to work for me as well. She came to work in 1998, and she took over all of the bookkeeping and the real estate business and everything. And then she just retired a couple of years ago, and she got remarried. So she's still here close by, but she's not at the sanctuary every day like we used to be all together.
Wow. Wonderful family. I mean, like, I'll be honest, my parents aren't that supportive of my animal loving side. I think it must have skipped a couple of generations. I think I think it was my grandparents or my great grandparents that was into animals, but not my parents. So I've my animal rescue days really started more as an adult, because as a child, we used to have guard dogs, like like in those days, it's like you have a guard dog, not as a pet. You don't look at a dog as a pet. You get a dog to protect your property kind of mentality. There's no such thing as a pet. And a cat is, well, a stray cat, and if they come, they breed is to catch a rat. It wasn't. Yeah, my parents were very practical people. So my love for animals was really something, I think, slowly over the years. And as an adult, when I finally had the freedom to pursue and start taking in animals, it I think if I had the means like you, I might probably have a big cat rescue too. One thing I would like to ask is, what if for someone who's into animal welfare, and you are such a proponent for legislation work, and you said you're a really shy person, how did you get there?
I think it's like they say necessity is the mother of invention. And when you have to do something, when there is no other way to make something happen, then you just make it happen. And you did this yourself this past year. You said, I have to make this change. Maybe you said it because you felt like you needed to be a bigger voice for the animals that you're protecting. I don't know what your driving motive was, but you took on this huge change that you had of saying, I hate social media and I hate being, talking to people. And so I'm going to do both. And when people realize that they make that decision, we might be naturally inclined to be shy or quiet, but if we look at what we really want to accomplish in the world and those things don't fit, then we just have to change them. And that's what I've had to do. Doesn't mean I'm comfortable or that I like it. We just went to that DC premiere of the conservation game in Washington, DC. And I spent the entire night doing selfies with people in front of this big screen. And that was just so uncomfortable for me to do, but I had to make it look like I was having the time of my life so that people wanted to do it. People would talk about the film. People would go away from that being all jazzed about our federal bill. And I think you just have to force yourself to play that part.
So, if I also ask you, what drives you every day to make what drives you, what compels you to wake up every day to do what you do?
Every day when I first wake up, the very first thing that I do is I lay there and I think about all of the things that I'm grateful for already. And then I start thinking about the things that I do this in present tense, that I'm grateful for the fact that our planet is healthy and that we have all of the natural resources that we need and that people are protecting wild places for wild animals. I do it as if it's already happened because that is the world that I want to bring about. And, we're down to like our last 5 minutes here, but I think that the way that we will do that is through remote cameras because everybody in the world, I think, wants to see tigers. Everybody in the world wants to see lions. But as long as we can just go down to a local zoo and see them, that's not going to save them in the wild. And some people, wealthy people, might be able to go see them in their natural environments. But I think that that's a bad thing too, because if you look at these tigers in India, where they show all these people that are surrounding these wild tigers with jeeps, and the poor thing can't even carry out its day-to-day things that it needs to do to survive because it's got so many people chasing it around in a jeep trying to get their picture or their video or their selfie that it's messing up that cat's life. And if the only way that any of us on this planet could see these magnificent animals was through 360-degree internet streaming cameras where they're placed in areas where these animals live, and they know, usually they follow the same kind of paths all the time. They have the same den sites. You could set these up in areas where you're going to get good footage of the cats. And then you pay the local people to make sure that those cameras are protected, that they're clean, that they're operational, that brings jobs to the area. And you do it on a subscription feed basis. So it's just like you pay for streaming channels on your TV or Netflix or Hulu or whatever. You pay to see those streams. And you could subscribe to a few of those streams yourself, probably, but the zoos could actually subscribe to all of those streams. And so going to the zoo, instead of seeing animals in cages, what you get to do is go into this building that's the Himalayas and it's freezing cold in there, and you put on the headset and now you are in the snow leopard's habitat and you're seeing snow leopards doing what they do in the wild, chasing sheep, raising young, doing all of that while you're smelling curry from the Hindu huts nearby. You've got this total immersion in that cat's world. And the zoos could provide so many different streams that people could never afford to have all of those streams at home. So I think the zoos could use the infrastructure they already have to do the work that they say that they're there to do. They say they're there to protect the wild and to further conservation. But this would actually put the money from those streaming cameras into the zoos that are paying for it and back into the local communities so that they have a reason not to chop down all the trees in the forest to use it for firewood, if they've got more money coming in from these cameras than they could ever make from eking out an existence farming, then they can afford better foods that are more plant-based foods, these all these cultured meats and things that they're doing now, so that we're not doing all of the factory farming that's killing our planet. All of those things work together toward protecting this beautiful planet that we all share. And that's what keeps me going every morning, is knowing that that is our future. And I just have to stay focused on it until everybody else can see that and embrace it and make that their reality too.
Well, Miss Carole Baskin, I want to thank you for giving me this hour and sharing your story and your vision for the world. It's a beautiful vision that you have, and I want to thank you on behalf of all the animals, big and small, that you have helped. Thank you so much for the work that you do, because you're such an awesome lady. Really, you're an awesome lady. And I wish you well, and blessings to you and your family, your beautiful family. And thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for being the kind of person that you are. You just made my day.
Wow, I'm so thankful and grateful that you took the time to listen to this podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could subscribe, download, rate, review, and share this with others whom you care about that may enjoy it as well. Thank you, and remember to be kind to yourself and others. Have a awesome day, everyone.